What are we talking about this week?
Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs. Okay. So I hate to break it to you, but I feel like conservation efforts for dinosaurs failed about, 60 million years ago?
Sort of, but all modern birds are essentially dinosaurs.
Okay. So I've heard that before. Just go on, while I wrap my head around that one, because that always tends to. Here's another rabbit hole I could go down.
So some dinosaurs were feathered.
Okay.
And at the Great Extinction Event 65 million years ago, when most of the dinosaurs went extinct, the ones that survived were the smaller ones that either were feathered already or began to develop feathers, because that extinction event created a huge disruption to the world's ecosystem. And for the next 15 million years, from 65 million years ago to about 50 million years ago, we saw rapid evolution of those species into essentially what are the modern bird families today. Lots of evolution continued after that 50 million year part, but that range is where everything branched and dinosaurs went from being the dominant animals on the planet to where birds began to emerge and cover the planet. Even if they weren't dominant in sort of an aggressive way, that's when they really blossomed.
So Emily Dickinson may have not realized it, but she really wasn't kidding when she said hope is a thing with feathers.
That's right. Feathers could have been a key evolutionary trait that allowed birds to continue surviving, or dinosaurs to continue surviving as birds.
Okay. All right. So then our featured topic is dinosaurs or dinosaur birds, or what's your plan? How do you want to walk us through this?
Well, it got me thinking about some birds just look prehistoric. So we're going to talk about 5 of the most prehistoric looking birds we could think of.
Okay. All right. Where do you want to start?
All right, so we basically picked 5 birds, but we're going to start with 3 in the U.S. and then go to a couple more that are international. We're going to start with another iconic bird, one that many people see, which is the great blue heron.
We have those on our lake. We see them all the time here at the cottage.
We do. In fact, and it's late January. The ice is frozen, 9 inches thick, and I saw a great blue heron out there yesterday on the edge of the water. So they're around all the time. But great blue herons have been found in the fossil record, for example, in the La Brea tar pits dating back to perhaps 40,000 years ago. And the heron family itself that it belongs to goes back to 60 million to 38 million years ago. So it certainly falls into that period of rapid evolution. And great blue herons look and sound like pterodactyls. They might be the closest thing that we can see in modern times. And it sounds like a pterodactyl even.
I'm trying to picture like a giant great blue heron now that you said that, because pterodactyls were huge. Can you imagine if we had that size of great blue heron on our lake? There wouldn't be any fish left.
Maybe, or maybe they wouldn't eat fish. We don't know.
Oh, great.
Maybe they'd eat, us. Who knows?
One more reason. So one of our dogs gets very angry when large birds fly over our house, and he barks his head off in the backyard. I'm not sure he would bark if he saw a pterodactyl, though.
Yeah. Not only that, but great blue herons have a prehistoric kind of diet, which might be a key to why they've survived for so long. They'll eat essentially anything they can find. Fish, snakes, eels, chipmunks, gophers. If they can, they have a prehistoric tool also. They basically wear a spear on their face and they spear things and eat whatever they can find. So their behavior, their look, their sound, it's all prehistoric. And they've evolved relatively differently, right? I mentioned that they were here on our lake this week in the dead of winter, 9 inches of ice. They've evolved a little bit differently from a migration perspective too, because I get asked all the time, don't great blue herons migrate? But actually, some of them do. But particularly in the southern hemisphere, the great blue herons down there migrate northward in the winter toward the equator in large flocks. And the first time I was in Costa Rica and I saw a flock of great blue herons flying overhead, it struck me because I'd never really seen a big flock of great blue herons, and I thought it must be some other bird until I realized it was a migrating group, which we just don't have up here. So in North America, our great blue herons largely do not migrate. They really just move toward open water when things freeze. So some of them move toward the coast or to rivers or just deeper into the swamps where there might be some, open water.
And that's interesting that you talk about them flocking, because I was thinking, like, up here, they behave much differently. At least from my observation, they seem like they're much more solitary. So we don't see a bunch of great blue herons on the lake where we live. We see a great blue heron, or maybe two, except like one town over from us in the wetlands area, that's where all of them tend to nest in, I think they're called rookeries, right?
That's right. A rookery is like a breeding colony, and there's a really good wetland with some dead snags up above the water. And here, those got decimated in sort of some ice storms we had in 2009, 2010. They made a really good comeback, but they do nest in communal colonies like that. But they are solitary hunters, and that's why you see them just one at a time on the lake. And one of the things that's really amusing to me is in the late summer, we often get some great egrets, which are communal hunters. And so when we have the great egrets, they try to hunt near the great blue herons, and the great blue herons chase them off, but then they try to come together. It's fun seeing them interact that way.
Okay. All right. That was interesting. So that's bird number 1 out of 5. What is the next bird that we're going to talk about? I'm actually kind of excited for this one.
I'd love to see in comments what came to mind for people for their most prehistoric bird when they thought of this topic. So do give us a chat and let us know. But the second one that came to mind for me is the pelican. And here in the US, we basically have 2 kinds of pelicans that we'll talk about. But pelicans have a really long evolutionary history themselves. They go back in the fossil evidence for at least 36 million years. And even though there's, I think, 20-ish species of pelicans around the world, there's 2 in the U.S., the brown pelican and the white pelican. They're essentially the same in structure, but they look different, and in their colors and their behaviors are quite different as well. So they look prehistoric mainly because they've got such a unique long beak with this weird pouch that they use to scoop up food. And they have kind of a prehistoric nonchalance about them. They're really aloof. And they kind of look like they simply couldn't be bothered by the presence of people sometimes because they've been here since way before we were around. But brown pelicans have a really interesting hunting style that's kind of prehistoric itself. They kind of cock their wings back and dive quickly and smack into the water over a school of fish and essentially stun the little fish in the school, and then scoop up all those stunned fish and drain out the water from their pouch to eat those down. And they're super thieves, too. They'll steal fish from other pelicans. They'll steal fish from cormorants, that kind of stuff. So they're sort of sloppy that way.
I actually love them. Whenever we happen to see one, usually it's when we're vacationing somewhere near the ocean on the East Coast, right? Down, like we've seen a lot of them when we've been down in like Key West or Santa Maria Island in Florida and whatnot.
Not in quite such high numbers, but even as high as the Delmarva Peninsula, that's Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, Delmarva, southward all along the coast, but certainly in big numbers. And, down in Georgia and Florida, you see them hanging out on fishing piers, trying to catch some extra bait fish or some chum from the fishermen and stuff. And a lot of them are very, acclimatized to seeing people.
I don't even know why I think they're so beautiful, but I do. I mean, I've seen a tremendous artwork from a variety of like naturalist artists who have focused from time to time on artwork for pelicans. And I just find them fascinating. And when we do see them publicly, I always yell out, Dustin, there's a pterodactyl.
Yeah, speaking of that, the species plates from Audubon of the different species, the pelican one is really striking. It is actually a good kind of quirky artwork and makes for really good home decor.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right. Okay, so that's 2 out of the 3.
Well, we haven't gotten to the details about the white pelican, which is quite different in terms of its behavior and its territory. So white pelicans are more just sort of the Georgia and Florida coastline, but they migrate up into central and western United States, all the way up into central Canada. So it's really possible to see flocks of pelicans migrating overhead in the western U.S., which I haven't seen, but sounds like quite a sight. And they have a really different hunting strategy where they do not hunt from the air diving into the water. Instead, they hunt in lowlands and wetlands and hunt communally kind of driving driving fish into the shallows where they then scoop up the groups of fish that they've corralled as a group. So that's pretty interesting. And they also nest communally in rookeries, similar to the great blue herons that we were talking about. But I came across a quote in the research for this from a legendary conservationist named Aldo Leopold. And he wrote, "Let a squadron of southbound pelicans but feel a lift of prairie breeze, and they sense at once that there is a landing in the geologic past, a refuge from that most relentless of aggressors. The future, with queer and antediluvian grunts, they set a wing, descending in majestic spirals to the welcoming wastes of a bygone age." If that doesn't speak to their prehistoric nature, I certainly can't do any better than that.
Yeah, I love it.
But they've been around for 11,000 years or more. And pelicans are another species that's had been decimated by the presence of DDT and really benefited from the conservation efforts in the 60s and 70s. And that's because DDT, as we know, thinned bird shells. But pelicans have a unique incubation strategy where they don't like lay down on their eggs the way that other birds do. They kind of stand on them and use the webbing of their feet over the eggs to shelter them. And so when the DDT impacted the thickness of eggshells, that strategy began to backfire on them. But we've made great progress in bringing them back. So it's a good conservation story.
Go conservationists for the win.
That's right.
Awesome. Okay. I'm trying to think while you're talking. Like, I know I've seen brown pelicans. Have I seen a white pelican? I don't know if I have or not.
It's a good question. I don't think I have a white pelican on my life list. I'm sure I've seen them in the past. But since I started birding, my own rule for myself was I wasn't going to count it unless I unless I saw it since I became a birder, or I have a few birds that I actually have photos of from before I was a birder that I've come across, and I've counted those. But I don't think white pelicans are on my list just yet.
Okay, so bring us home as far as U.S.-based prehistoric-looking birds. What's third on your list?
I think one of the most peculiar and endearing looking birds because of its peculiarity in the U.S. is the wood stork. And the wood stork can be traced as far back as 100,000 years ago, but its family goes back in the geologic record at least 20 million years, maybe as far as 23 million years. So it certainly is actually prehistoric. And it's kind of the closest thing in the U.S. that we have to the folkloric story of stork bringing babies and things like that, which is more prominent in Europe and was tied to like the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales and things like that. But America has its stork, and it's the wood stork.
All right. So I have to tell you, I saw this on the list for us to record about, and I wasn't really sure what you were talking about until you mentioned a stork delivering babies, because that's really an iconic image, I think so many of us have in our minds when we think about storks. So it's a white bird then. Is that what it looks like?
It's primarily white with a black face and sort of head.
I see. Okay.
And storks in Europe are known for nesting on top of houses, like in the crook of a chimney on the roof in individual houses, the way that great blue herons nest in the dead trees like we were talking about. So in Europe, there's places where the storks have been really endeared as coming back and sort of being a resident and being paired up with, individual families and stuff. But we don't have that here in the U.S. The wood storks nest in wetlands, up in the trees. And one of my big, regrets as a birder is that I found birding late. I actually went to school in St. Augustine, Florida. And it turns out St. Augustine is one of the best places in all of the U.S. for birding, but particular for seeing wood storks and some other birds up close, because although there's an alligator farm in Zoological Park with captive alligators and other crocodilian species, the local birds, including wood storks, have discovered on their own that it's a very safe nesting space. So inside the alligator farm, you can go walk on elevated boardwalks within 10 or 20 feet of wood stork nests and observe them up close. And they even allow like a special photography pass to go in early in the morning for photographers and stuff. So that's the best way to see wood storks, although you certainly can encounter them in more natural habitats. Those are native wild birds that nest there. It's pretty fun.
I have a fondness for that alligator park. So the first time my family took me on a long vacation when I was growing up was in first grade. And they took me to Florida, and we went to Disney World. But then on our way, before coming home, we stopped in St. Augustine and we went to the alligator farm. And years later, the only thing about that trip that I remembered was the alligator farm. I have no memories at all of having been to Walt Disney World as a child. And it killed my parents. My father was like, we spent all that money taking you to Walt Disney World, and all you remember is the alligators. And I'm like, well, of course. I mean, come on. It is a special little place in Florida, that alligator farm, for sure.
Yeah, and I suspect that trip was probably during April school vacation. And
Yeah.
if that's true, I bet there were wood storks there when you were there.
Interesting.
One last fun fact about the wood stork is that they have an interesting behavioral technique for keeping their nestlings cool in the nest, which is they'll actually scoop up water in their beaks and swallow it, but regurgitate that water to dump it on the heads of their nestlings to keep them cool in the hot southern sun.
I'm having flashbacks of like my mom like cleaning off my face when I was a kid with like by like licking a napkin and like, I'm sorry, little baby wood storks. I kind of know how you feel in those cases.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, they have a gross water park.
Hey, moms do what they got to do sometimes, right? All right, so those were our 3 from the U.S. Now, you said there were 5, so I'm assuming that the last 2 come from other places in the world.
Yeah, we're going to go a bit further afield, and our 4th prehistoric bird is the Indian gray hornbill. And I was recently shown a picture of this bird from a friend of mine who went home to visit her family in India. And while she was there, she sent me a picture on WhatsApp of the hornbill that they had seen. And her sister, who's an ecologist actually, identified it as the Indian gray hornbill. And I immediately went, that's got to go into our prehistoric bird story. It's just a wild looking bird. It just looks prehistoric. It sort of looks like a woodpecker, but with a big scythe on its beak, like if it was going to like cut you or something. But they have some really cool behavioral features as well. They've been really successful, and they exist all over the Indian subcontinent. And they've been able to adapt really well. So you can see an Indian gray hornbill in like city parks all over India. So it's not a hard bird to see if you happen to be there. It thrives in those environments. And the Indian gray hornbill also has a super interesting reproductive habit. They nest in cavities like many birds do, but the female Indian gray hornbill seals itself inside the cavity for the entirety of the incubation process. So they bring mud and seal up the hole, and the female stays inside there for, I don't know what it is, multiple weeks at a time during the incubation process. And during that whole time, the male brings her food and passes it through the little hole and feeds her for the entirety of the incubation process. So it must be really important to their strategy to keep those eggs warm at all times, I guess.
I just picture her like scrolling book talk and reading her fantasy romances and watching her shows and giving herself facials. I'm sure it's not that pleasant, but that was the image that came to mind to me of a mom being shut in while she's taking care of her babies.
I think you might just be envious of her introversion level.
Maybe a little bit, although I would want to go outside for a walk now and then. Like, yeah, that's got to be hard.
They also play, like many birds, a crucial role in the seed dispersal of the local seeds in their environment. So in various parts of India, too, they hold a really strong cultural importance, and they're featured in local folklore and traditions. They symbolize traits like fidelity and nurturing due to this unique nesting and breeding habitat. So they were a fun bird to learn about, so I thank my friends for that.
Yeah, it sounds like a really unique bird, especially the stuff about reproduction. I thought that was really kind of a striking and unique fact about this bird as you were talking about it. All right, we've got one more dinosaur bird left on the list. So what's the grand finale? How are you closing us out?
This bird just looks unlike any bird you've ever seen, and it's the shoebill.
I know what this is. This is the TikTok bird. This bird's all over TikTok.
It definitely has a face made for a camera. It might not be called pretty, but it's a face made to be photographed for sure. And the shoebill's evolutionary history is also super long, spanning over 30 million years. These birds can be found in sort of a strip in central to eastern Africa. And that geologic history also includes an ancestor called the Goliathia. And that Goliathia was one of the largest birds in the fossil record, like I said, going back probably 30 million years or so. And they're known for a patient hunting style, very much like the great blue heron that we talked about. They'll stand motionless in the wetlands, waiting for prey to approach. And when that happens, they swiftly and forcefully capture that thing in the water, eating whatever they can find in terms of invertebrates, fish, amphibians, and even small reptiles. So the iconic picture of them is kind of standing still and kind of looking straight at you because, you know, that's an important way to see it. They're classified as vulnerable. There's probably only 3,500 to 5,000 individual shoebills left in the world, so they're a common target for birders that go to Africa. And like so many of our birds, they've been impacted by habitat destruction, human disturbance, and hunting once upon a time was a primary threat for them. So they're a bird that, you know, benefits from modern conservation practices. So thanks to our conservation friends in Africa for that.
And hopefully as they become more popular and people who are able to travel to Africa to see them, maybe that will boost the economy in ways that will encourage more and more people to protect those birds.
Yeah, ecotourism is, you know, a primary driver. Birders provide a lot of funds to the local economy, allow the funding of research in different areas, and then, of course, the ongoing maintenance of wildlife areas and refuges and stuff like that.
Interesting. All right. I think that was a really great list. I think seeing any one of these birds now, at least for me, if I have the opportunity, is going to make me want to watch Jurassic Park again, maybe. I might look at that T-Rex in that movie a little differently. Imagine him with feathers. That would be interesting. So one final question that I have in this segment of the vodcast is, so Dustin, if you had the chance, I know you've seen some of these birds, but not all of them. If you had the chance to see any one of these, which one would top your bucket list?
Definitely the shoebill, right? Both because it's probably the hardest for me or anyone to get to unless you already live in Africa, because it's not widespread across a huge area the same way that the hornbill is. And it's just a common bucket list bird. So anytime I get if I ever get the opportunity to go on safari to Africa, it'll almost certainly include some time spent at a place where the shoebill lives. Luckily, if you get to the right place, I hear they're not too difficult to find. They're they stick to a very tight territory and almost never fly more than 1,000 meters or so at a time.